The first flash is not the explosion. It is the moment your brain fails to understand what it is seeing. A light brighter than anything in your lifetime floods the sky, bleaching shadows into existence, burning outlines of objects onto surfaces in fractions of a second. There is no warning siren in most real scenarios, no dramatic countdown, no orderly evacuation. The danger begins with confusion, and confusion is the most lethal condition in the first seconds of a nuclear event. By the time your conscious mind recognizes that something is wrong, the physics is already unfolding at a scale you cannot outrun. A nuclear detonation is not just a bomb, it is a cascade of physical phenomena compressed into milliseconds. The initial flash, known as the thermal pulse, travels at the speed of light. It is followed by a shock wave moving faster than the speed of sound, carrying immense overpressure capable of collapsing buildings and turning debris into high-velocity projectiles. Simultaneously, ionizing radiation bursts outward, and within minutes, radioactive particles begin to fall back to the ground as fallout. Each of these phases operates on different timelines, and survival depends on understanding those timelines precisely, not emotionally, not instinctively, but scientifically. The most common misunderstanding is that survival is determined by distance alone. People assume that if they are not near the center, they are safe. This assumption is dangerously incomplete. Survival is determined by shielding, timing, and behavior within the first 48 hours, not simply proximity. A person several kilometers away but exposed to fallout without protection may receive a lethal dose of radiation, while someone closer but properly shielded may survive. The invisible nature of radiation makes it psychologically deceptive. You cannot see it, smell it, or feel it immediately, which leads to fatal delays in response. Hidden within nuclear physics is a principle known as the inverse square law, which governs how radiation intensity decreases with distance. While this law suggests that intensity drops rapidly as you move away from the source, it does not account for fallout distribution. Fallout is not uniform. It is shaped by wind patterns, terrain, and the height of the explosion. Ground bursts produce significantly more fallout than air bursts because they pull debris from the earth into the radioactive plume. This debris becomes irradiated and falls back down, contaminating large areas far beyond the initial blast zone. Evidence from historical nuclear tests and events such as Hiroshima and Nagasaki shows that many survivors lived not because they were far away, but because they were shielded, inside concrete structures, underground spaces, or behind dense materials. In fact, individuals who took immediate cover behind thick walls or in basements had dramatically higher survival rates than those who attempted to flee in open areas. This contradicts the instinct to run. In the first seconds after the flash, movement is often the wrong decision. The correct response is immediate shielding. This leads to the first survival implication. Your initial reaction determines your exposure to thermal burns and blast injuries. If you are outdoors and see a sudden intense flash, dropping to the ground and covering exposed skin can significantly reduce burns. Turning away from the light protects your eyes from flash blindness, which can last minutes to hours and cause disorientation. The shockwave will arrive seconds later depending on your distance, and being prone reduces the impact of the blast wind and flying debris. However, surviving the blast is only the beginning. The escalation begins with fallout, which is the most underestimated and deadly phase for those outside the immediate blast radius. Fallout particles can begin descending within 15 to 30 minutes, depending on distance and wind conditions. These particles emit gamma radiation, which penetrates deeply into the body and damages cellular structures. The danger is not just external exposure but also inhalation and ingestion. A critical misunderstanding is the belief that ordinary buildings provide sufficient protection. Most residential structures offer minimal shielding against gamma radiation. Materials like wood and drywall do little to block it. The effectiveness of shielding depends on density and thickness. Concrete, brick, earth, and water are significantly more effective. This is why basements, underground parking structures, and the central cores of large buildings are vastly safer than upper floors or open spaces. The hidden science here involves attenuation, the reduction of radiation intensity as it passes through material. Each layer of dense material reduces radiation exposure exponentially. For example, a few inches of concrete can reduce gamma radiation significantly, while several feet of earth can reduce it to near background levels. This is not theoretical. It is measurable and has been validated through decades of radiological research. Evidence from Cold War-era civil defense studies demonstrates that even improvised shelters can drastically increase survival chances. People who remained indoors, away from windows, and surrounded by dense materials experienced far lower radiation doses than those who attempted to evacuate immediately. The key factor was time. Radiation levels from fallout decrease rapidly in the first 48 hours due to radioactive decay, following what is known as the 7 to 10 rule, where radiation drops to 1/10 of its intensity after 7 hours, and 1/100th after 49 hours. This introduces a critical survival implication. Staying sheltered during the first 24 to 48 hours is often more important than escaping the area. The instinct to flee can lead directly into contaminated zones, increasing exposure. Without real-time radiation data, movement becomes a gamble with invisible consequences. The safest strategy is controlled immobility, remaining in a well-shielded location until radiation levels decrease significantly. The escalation continues as human factors begin to dominate. Panic, misinformation, and lack of preparation amplify the physical dangers. People may leave shelters too early, consume contaminated food or water, or fail to decontaminate properly. Decontamination itself is a misunderstood process. It does not require specialized equipment. It requires removing outer clothing, which can eliminate up to 90% of radioactive contamination, and washing exposed skin with water to remove particles. As the first 24 hours pass, the psychological pressure intensifies. The silence outside becomes deceptive. There is no visible threat, no immediate sensory warning, yet the danger remains at its peak. This is where most survival failures occur, not during the blast but during the waiting period. The human brain is not designed to tolerate invisible threats for long durations. People begin to rationalize leaving shelter, convincing themselves that the danger has passed. This is a critical error. The hidden principle at this stage is radioactive decay kinetics. The most dangerous isotopes released in fallout decay rapidly, which means the environment becomes significantly safer with time, but only if that time is respected. The 7 to 10 rule is not just a guideline, it is a survival boundary. Leaving shelter too early exposes the body to radiation levels that are still high enough to cause acute radiation syndrome, a condition that may not show immediate symptoms but leads to severe internal damage over hours to days. Evidence from nuclear test sites shows that areas with high radiation levels can become relatively safer within 2 days, but not uniformly. Hotspots remain and contamination can persist in dust, soil, and water. This creates a complex environment where movement must be calculated, not reactive. Survivors who waited the full 48 hours before relocating had significantly better outcomes than those who moved within the first day. At this point, survival transitions into resource management. Water becomes the first critical variable. Open water sources may be contaminated with fallout particles, especially if exposed during the initial hours. The safest water is sealed, bottled, or stored in covered containers before the event. Food follows the same principle. Packaged and sealed items are far safer than anything exposed to open air. This is not about scarcity yet, it is about contamination. The misunderstanding here is that radiation spreads like a gas. It does not. Fallout is particulate. It settles. This means contamination is often on surfaces, not uniformly in the air after the initial period. This allows for controlled interaction with the environment if proper precautions are taken. Covering the mouth and nose with cloth, minimizing time outdoors, and avoiding contact with dust significantly reduce exposure during necessary movement. As the 48-hour mark approaches, the situation shifts again. Radiation levels have dropped substantially, but infrastructure damage, communication breakdowns, and limited emergency response create a new type of risk. The environment is no longer immediately lethal, but it is unstable. Roads may be blocked, medical facilities overwhelmed, and information unreliable. This is where long-term survival logic begins to take over. Movement must now be strategic, away from heavily contaminated zones, toward areas with better access to resources and support. But even here, the same principles apply. Minimize exposure, maximize shielding, and avoid unnecessary risks. The event does not end after 2 days, it evolves. And this leads to the final realization. The true danger of a nuclear event is not just the explosion, but the chain of decisions that follow. Every stage presents a choice between instinct and knowledge. Instinct tells you to run, to act, to escape immediately. Knowledge tells you to pause, to shield, to wait, and to move only when conditions allow. The difference between survival and failure is not strength, speed, or luck. It is understanding. Moral: in extreme situations, panic feels natural, but it is often deadly. Survival does not belong to the fastest or the strongest. It belongs to the most informed, the most patient, and the most disciplined mind.